Yes.
Thank you. The next document that we'll go to then is the 1986 annual report, which is at DHSC 0007008. This report was published the following year, in 1987, and Sir Donald Aitchison's introduction was dated September 1987, so it must have been published towards the end of that year. In the 1986 annual report, Sir Donald Aitchison addressed AIDS as the first topic in his introduction and devoted 2 pages to it in his introduction. That's at page 9, please. So we can see after the first introductory remarks, the first subheading towards the bottom of that page is acquired immune deficiency syndrome and HIV infection. He noted the number of cases reported to CDSC that year in the first 6 months. So he's talking about the first 6 months of 1987, even though this is the 1986 annual report, just to add to our slight confusion about where the cut-off date is for the information in these reports. He notes that there were 281 cases of AIDS reported compared to 107 in the comparable period during 1986. He notes the difficulty which arose because the nature of the definition of AIDS introduced an arbitrary element to the dating of diagnosis, and the delays of varying length between the diagnosis and the reporting of cases. He estimated that if the date of diagnosis was taken as the point of reference, the epidemic curve of cases in the UK was at that time exponential, with a doubling time of about 10 months. And he found a similar curve, so a similar exponential curve, looking at deaths attributed to AIDS, plotted by date of death. He noted that the future trend of the epidemic would depend on the number of people currently infected and the rate of incidence of new infections, and that there were no reliable estimates of either, but a total of 5,009 positive tests had been reported from England, up just over to the next page, to June 1987. So again, he's looking at the data to mid-1987 in his 1986 report. He notes that almost all of those people were believed to be in high-risk groups. Now, we've looked at what he said already in the middle of that page about the importance of a public information campaign. Could we next go, please, to page 63 of this document? And here we are in the Communicable Diseases chapter of the report. And we can see that more detailed statistics were provided. There is a 6-page section on AIDS under communicable diseases in the 1986 report. As a general note, when people are looking for statistics, these Chief Medical Officer annual reports are quite interesting because they year on year break down the reported cases by transmission characteristics, and so we can trace year by year what happened in relation to, and if we look at table 4.3, for example, cumulative totals of reports of AIDS cases by transmission characteristics for people with haemophilia and recipients of blood both abroad and in the UK. So we can see that there were, for example, 6 cases of transmission by blood transfusion abroad and 3 in the UK as at December 1986, and 21 people with haemophilia. Could we go to page 64, please? And look at the top of that page. And similarly, this is HIV positive cases reported in England by transmission characteristics. And we can see that there were 405 people with haemophilia who were HIV positive that year, and 26 recipients of blood. So that's the 1986 annual report. If we could go next to the 1987 annual report, please, which is at DHSC 007009. So the 1987 annual report was published the following year in 1988, and Sir Donald Aitchison's introduction is dated August 1988. In this report, he again addressed AIDS in his introduction, and if we could go to page 15, please, we can see that. So it's in the introduction, but it's in a slightly less prominent position than the year before, and he devotes 1.5 pages towards the end of the section in his introduction. And I don't need to zoom in particularly, but if we just flip to the next page, broadly the focus is what's going on internationally at this point. The more detailed information comes in this report. For the first time, there's a dedicated chapter titled AIDS, HIV, Infection and Sexually Transmitted Disease, with 12 pages devoted to AIDS, and that starts at page 123, please. And so this is that chapter. Starts by saying that during 1987, the government devoted much time and effort to the problems caused by the HIV epidemic. The intense public awareness which developed earlier has been maintained, and it talks about 4 main areas of activity: public education, research, the development of services for care and treatment. And I missed surveillance, that's why I've only got to 3. 4 in total. Talks about international cooperation a little bit more. And then if we look at the surveillance section, we can see that reporting continued, and then down at the bottom of the page, that there was a cumulative UK total of 8,017 cases of HIV positive tests. And then if we could go next, please, to page 125 within the same chapter. And zoom in on the table 6.1, please. So again, this year, detailed information is given, cumulative totals of HIV positive cases, this is just in England, not the UK, by transmission category. And they've got the cumulative totals, then in brackets, the totals for the year. So, for example, could we highlight the rows for haemophiliac and recipient of blood and blood products, please? That's really helpful, thank you. So we can see for people with haemophilia, there was a cumulative total of 978 cases to the end of 1987. And of that total, 573 had tested positive that year. For recipients of blood transfusions or blood products, that was a cumulative total of 63, and 37 people had tested positive that year. Could we next go to page 129, please?
What's the distinction? Oh, I think I understand it. I was just thinking the recipient of blood and blood products, that could be somebody who's a transfusee, or it could be someone who's given blood products not being a haemophiliac, but in the course of their treatment. I see.
Yes, I think that must be right, because otherwise the figures don't make sense. To be completely accurate, all of the people with haemophilia would also fall under the category of people who are recipients of blood products, but it's clear from the figures that that's not the way round that it's organised.
What might be a bit surprising about the figures for the people who have haemophilia is that more than half of the total are said to have been first reported during 1987, when what we have heard about testing being offered to those who were haemophiliac and had blood products, you might have thought they would have shown up earlier.
That's a good point. I don't have any more contextual information for comparison, but I do highlight that this is a helpful source, and it might bear more investigation, and more weight could be placed on these figures to see how they do fit with the information we have from other sources in terms of testing and when those tests were carried out and when the results were known. It is apparently on the face of this table a majority of the cumulative total who'd received their results that year.
It may be some evidence of delayed reporting, but that's a question which has to be answered by others, and it can't be necessarily be inferred.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. So if we could go to page 129, please. We can see that there's a section there on HIV and blood donations, if we could zoom in a little. It's noted that year the NBTS had continued to screen all blood donations and that the standard of HIV antibody testing in the regional transfusion centres continued to be regularly monitored. All the would-be donors were given the AIDS leaflet, and it notes that by the end of 1987, a large number of donations had been screened for antibodies to HIV. 90 had been confirmed to be positive. The proportion of positives in 1987 was significantly less than it was in 1986, which was considered to confirm that many donors had been screened out, and people who tested negative on their first test donated more than once since. So insofar as those statistics go, that was a positive trend. Then if we go to the section below, please. Public education. We've looked at this, showing that in the autumn of 1986 it decided to expand the campaign. This just gives the finances that I don't think we've brought out so far in today. A further 20 million was allocated for the 12 months from November 1986. Between November 1986 and March 1987, 7.5 million were spent on advertising in all the main media and on the distribution to the households of the leaflet that we looked at. So that was the 1987 report, and then just the very last document we'll look at today is the 1988 annual report, which is at DHSC 0007010. So this report was published in 1989. Sir Donald Aitchison's introduction was dated September 1989. so we can infer that it was published towards the end of 1989. If we look at the introduction, again, could we go to page 18, please? And look at, sorry, could we just go to the page before? I might have given you the wrong. Okay, thank you. So we can see at this page, there's the beginning of the introductory section on HIV, AIDS, and sexually transmitted diseases. It's noted that there's a longer section in chapter 5. It's referred to the statistics which are provided, and then towards the end of the page, he talks about an expert group working on statistics on the incidence and prevalence of cases of AIDS and other HIV-associated conditions. And then on the next page, if we could focus on the top half, perfect, thank you. We can see that the group concluded that between 10 and 30,000 cases of AIDS would have been diagnosed by the end of 1992 in England and Wales, and that over the next 10 to 15 years, at least 16,000 to 40,000 cases of AIDS must be expected among people already infected. But in the next paragraph, it's noted that the numbers of new AIDS cases per month were by then, so by 1988, increasing less rapidly than in earlier stages of the epidemic. Past behavioural changes in the homosexual community and the current effects of therapeutic advances were thought to both have probably contributed to this welcome development. However, Sir Donald Aitchison says it would be a gross error to allow this change to engender complacency, and he notes that the need to maintain and for others to adopt the safer behaviours, because otherwise he thinks that improvement will be temporary. And it's interesting that he notes that there's a trend downwards in other sexually transmitted diseases noticed in genitourinary medicine clinics, including gonorrhea. And he suggests that that shows changes in sexual behaviour which have been brought about by the public education campaign aimed at minimising the spread of HIV infection. So it's a knock-on effect, but in some ways it could be taken to be a proxy to show the effectiveness of the public education campaign that we've heard so much about today. If we then go to page 120, please. This is the section in the Communicable Diseases chapter on AIDS and HIV infection. And if we flip to page 121, or scroll, we can see under AIDS cases, please. Oh, sorry, under the present state of the epidemic, please, just at the bottom of that page. That at the end of 1988, the cumulative total of reports of HIV-infected people in England was 8,156. In 1988, 1,630 new reports were received, considerably fewer than in 1987. And again, it's noted that it would be rash to assume from this evidence alone that the incidence of new infections is falling. But this was the last annual report where AIDS took such a prominent position, and subsequent volumes showed that the flattening of the curve, which began this year, continued. They continued to refer to public education campaigns at a local and national level, but the degree of prominence and priority that was placed on AIDS began to decline from this report onwards.
Is there a table in this report which corresponds to the table for the routes of transmission in the previous reports?
Could we go back to page 120 and then just flip through that section? Because I can't remember off the top of my head, but it will be here if there is one. Yes, so
Thank
the
you.
equivalent table, if we...
And that's the cumulative total.
Yes, that's right. If we go forwards, it might be that there may be more information giving the yearly.
And that's to the
figures.
31st of December. Can you just help me with this? Was it in 1988 that the writ was issued in the HIV litigation?
I can't immediately, but I'm sure we can find that information. Yes, I'm being instructed, yes.
And that had over 960 claimants, plaintiffs, did it not?
I'm being instructed that the figure changed during the litigation. We'll investigate and get that
And
figure for you.
the other question, which is the same vein, which is all goes to the accuracy of reporting and its reliability, is that when the Macfarlane Trust was topped up by £24,000, which was in 1988, I think, maybe 1989, that was in respect of 1,200 people, each of whom would be given a flat sum of £2,000. Where do you get the 1,200 from if the total here is 965 in the end of 1988? It doesn't seem to fit easily if these figures are actually accurate. It looks as though there may have been some underreporting. That's the question. Has there been underreporting? Because I'm not altogether sure how the figures fit.
That's something that we will do some further investigation into.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that concludes the presentation on the role of the Chief Medical Officer. Tomorrow, the inquiry will hear evidence from Carol Grayson.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Ms. Barrett. Tomorrow, 10 o'clock, Ms. Carol Grayson.